The Oval Office was unusually quiet that Sunday afternoon. Outside, Washington felt calm, almost disconnected from the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away. But inside the White House, history was collapsing into a single moment. Franklin D. Roosevelt sat listening to fragmented reports coming in over crackling lines. Words arrived out of order. Burning ships, explosions, aircraft with red markings. Pearl Harbor was under attack. At first, the information didn't sound real. It couldn't be real. The United States had avoided war for years. Isolationism wasn't just a policy, it was a promise to the American people. Europe was burning, Asia was already engulfed, but America believed the oceans would protect it. That illusion died in the Oval Office. This wasn't a border incident. This wasn't an accident. And Roosevelt understood something immediately that few others grasped so quickly. This attack had awakened something Japan could not control. In that moment, the president didn't just see destruction. He saw inevitability. He saw factories roaring back to life, shipyards glowing through the night, millions of Americans shifting from disbelief to fury. He saw isolationism collapse under the weight of rage and resolve. Pearl Harbor had not weakened America. It had unlocked it. Roosevelt had spent years carefully navigating public opinion. He knew how deeply Americans wanted peace. Even as war raged abroad, he spoke cautiously, understanding that pushing too hard could fracture the nation. But now, the choice was gone. Japan had chosen for him. Inside the Oval Office, aides moved quickly, relaying intelligence, confirming targets, assessing losses. Roosevelt remained calm, but his mind raced far ahead of the room. He knew the next steps would reshape the world. This wasn't just about retaliation. This was about transformation. America was about to become something it had never been before, fully mobilized industrial war machine. The president understood that Japan had gambled everything on speed and surprise. The attack aimed to knock the United States out before it could respond, but Roosevelt saw the flaw immediately. America's true strength was not its battleships anchored at Pearl Harbor. It was its factories, its manpower, its ability to outproduce any enemy on Earth, and those were untouched. As reports confirmed that aircraft carriers were not in port, Roosevelt realized something else. The Pacific War would be long, brutal, and unforgiving. But it would also be a war Japan could not win. Not against a nation whose economy alone dwarfed entire empires. That realization settled over the Oval Office like gravity. The shock of Pearl Harbor fused into clarity. Roosevelt dictated instructions with precision. Military leaders were summoned. Diplomatic channels shifted overnight. Allies who had been cautiously supported would now be fully embraced. Britain, battered and exhausted, would no longer stand alone. The Soviet Union, locked in a fight for survival, would soon feel the pressure ease. A single morning in Hawaii had rewritten global strategy. As darkness fell on Washington, Roosevelt began shaping the words that would define the era. He knew exactly how history would remember this day. Not as chaos, not as confusion, but as a turning point. A date which will live in infamy. Those words were not emotional improvisation. They were deliberate. Roosevelt understood the power of narrative. He knew Americans needed clarity, not complexity. An enemy. A reason. A purpose. Inside the Oval Office, the president wasn't grieving alone. He was preparing a nation. December 7th had unified what years of debates never could. Across America, radios crackled with disbelief, but disbelief quickly turned into anger. Recruitment offices would soon overflow. Assembly lines would multiply. Women would step into factories. Cities would retool themselves for war. America's economy would shift faster than any nation in history. Japan had awakened a sleeping giant, but Roosevelt knew the giant had always been there. The next day, as Congress gathered, Roosevelt wheeled himself forward and spoke calmly, firmly, without hesitation. There was no doubt in his voice, no uncertainty. War was no longer theoretical. It was necessary, and it was total. Behind the scenes, the Oval Office became the nerve center of a global effort. There would be no return to isolation. Training camps filled with young men who no longer questioned why they were fighting. They knew. Inside the Oval Office, Roosevelt monitored reports not just from battlefields, but from production charts. He tracked steel output, aircraft numbers, ship tonnage. War, he believed, was as much about logistics as courage. And America dominated logistics. The realization that struck Roosevelt on December 7th never left him. Japan had crossed a line that guaranteed its own destruction. Not immediately, not instantly, but inevitably. The Pacific War would be long. Islands would be taken, one by one. Lives would be lost in numbers almost impossible to comprehend. But the outcome had been set the moment bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. Because the United States now fought with unity. As months turned into years, the Oval Office became a place where victory was constructed, piece by piece. Roosevelt's health declined, but his vision never wavered. He saw beyond battles to the shape of the world after the war. Alliances forged in shock would become institutions. Power once fragmented would consolidate. Pearl Harbor didn't just change the war, it changed America's role in history. The nation that once hesitated now led. The nation that once avoided conflict now shaped peace. And it all began with a quiet moment in the Oval Office, when a president realized that the end of isolationism meant the beginning of American dominance. Japan had struck steel and concrete. Roosevelt responded with industry, unity, and time. And time was on America's side. If you want to explore more moments where history changed behind closed doors, visit the channel and watch the next video, because the decisions you never see often shape the world the most.